Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries will this month release the Fishing Rights Allocation. There are several new agreements and bars put in place, and to tell us more ahead of the rights allocation is Deputy Director General responsible for Fisheries, Siphokazi Ndudane, who joins us from our Sea Point studio. Siphokazi, thanks so much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you very much, Leanne. Good morning to you and morning to your viewers.
How have the fishing rights been allocated?
Leanne, maybe just to take you back to why we are doing this process, your video that you have played is giving context to the state of the fisheries resources, not just only in South Africa, but around the world. So fishing resources, marine living resources are basically under pressure everywhere in the world. There's various reasons that contributing to that: climate change, the way we do the fishing. So the issues of sustainability are quite very critical. This is the reason why we allocate fishing rights, so that we ensure an orderly access to the resources, so that there are legal people that are known that can harvest the resources. They are managed in how they can harvest the resources, including the fishing gear, the type of nets they can use, the size of the boats that they can use. This is basically to ensure sustainability, that we do the fishing in a right way that needs to ensure long-term sustainability, so that there's fish for the future.
Yeah.
Now, what we do in South Africa, using a piece of legislation called the Marine Living Resources Act, nobody in this country can be able to do fishing in the waters of South Africa. I was impressed with your precision of the coastal line, of the size of our coastal line, actually. And the issue is that within that coastal line, nobody can fish if is not granted permission to fish. And this permission, we call it a fishing right.
Okay.
Now, the fishing right, you can have it for a period of 8 years, a period of 10 years, and maximum a period of 15 years.
Yeah.
So the rights that we are busy allocating now were allocated in 2005, and it is 10 sectors that we are allocating these fishing rights. So when they expire, because the fishing right in its own is not a property right, but it is just a privilege given by the country to an individual to harvest the fishing resources in our country. So when it expires, it reverts back to the state, and the state reserves the right to reallocate it to that person or to give it to another person. But basically the process is to ensure that we know who is fishing in our country, they are regulated, and they are managed to ensure that we maintain the resources that we have in our country for the future.
There's a big concern for small-scale fishermen and subsistence fishing communities.
Absolutely.
Talk to me about them.
The concern is genuine, Leanne. The concern has been there for quite a long time. You will recall that there was a court case that was brought to the department. That time we were the Department of Environmental Affairs and Tourism by the Equality Court in 2007. And basically, this court judgment was saying the Marine Living Resources Act is basically focusing on the commercial fishing, and we are giving rights to the commercial sector. But there is communities whose livelihood depends on these resources. They live along this coastline, and they basically have no access to be able to make a living from these resources. And rightfully so, because the Act at the time did not recognize the small-scale fishers or the communities as a cluster that needs to be provided and made a provision for. But it was through a very long process that started many years back that finally, in February of this year, the President signed into law the amendment to the Marine Living Resources Act, which now recognizes the small-scale fishers. It is within that context then that this process of rights allocation we are doing, we are setting aside TAC, which is total allowable catch, which is the amount of fish that can be harvested out of our waters. So we are now deliberately setting aside good apportionment of the fish that is going to be allocated to the small fishing communities under the cooperatives. Now, one more important thing here I need to also mention is that currently in South Africa, within the fishing spectrum, you have got big companies that are harvesting fishing resources from the resources close to the coastline and to the resources that are offshore and in the high seas. Now, we are trying to make a distinction so that at least we keep big companies, because we understand they sustain jobs, they have created, they've done investments in the fishing industry, and we basically don't want to take them out of business. But we are saying we can maybe keep the big business offshore and high seas so that they can fish there, because there's space there and there's plenty of fish to be harvested.
Okay.
So that we keep the inshore resources that are close to the people, so that we reserve them purely for the small-scale fishers, so that these communities can have meaningful participation in the harvesting of the fishing.
All right, DDG, thank you very much for explaining that to us. It's a pleasure having you here on the program. I know we'll talk more about that because it is happening the entire month, and that's when the allocation is happening. That's the Deputy Director General responsible for Fisheries Siphokazi Ndudane joining us from our Sea Point studios. Quick break, news after this. Stay tuned.